Hi, thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm Devin Coldaway, a TechCrunch reporter, and you've all tuned into a panel on cutting out carbon emitters using bioengineering. And I thought that I'd maybe just start out by letting you all introduce yourselves. Why don't we start with Jennifer from LanzaTech, if you could give us a quick intro of what you're doing, and then maybe we can throw to Patricia and Aaron after that.
Thanks, Devin. I'm Jennifer Holmgren. I'm the CEO of LanzaTech. And what LanzaTech does essentially is uses biology to convert pollution to products. So from things that we would normally consider waste, we make things that we use in our daily lives.
Great. And Patricia?
Hi, my name is Patricia Bubner, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Orbelian Bio. And we will be the first company to bring premium cell-cultured, or how some call it, lab-grown meat to the market. We use cells to make meat outside of the animal in bioreactors.
And Aaron, introduce yourself, please.
Sure. So my name is Aaron Nesser. I am the co-founder and CTO of AlgaeNet, where we are working to create a clean fashion industry using the most effective means possible, which is materials.
I'm glad you said your company name out loud as well, because I wasn't sure if it was alga, like algae knit, because I've heard alga as well as algae. But
it's all good for me.
Yeah. Jennifer, maybe my first question for you, I guess, is I feel like your company works closest with traditional emissions sources in manufacturing, what people think of when they think of emissions. Can you tell me how you arrived at this approach of siphoning off useful compounds directly from the factory processes?
Well, if you stop and think about what we do is we have a bacteria that actually is kind of our great-great-great-great-grandfather. It was actually in this atmosphere. It survived on this planet when there was no oxygen, and it was actually a very polluted kind of toxic situation. So we purposely said this bacteria will do well in toxic situations. So emissions from steel mills, ferroalloy plants, etc., normally have a lot of contaminants. So that really is kind of the genesis of going after point sources that are highly polluting.
Interesting. So sort of taking an extremophile and repurposing it. What a wonderful idea. I understand there's actually a lot of that going on. Patricia, for your part, it's sort of common knowledge that livestock and their feed are huge contributors to the sort of carbon ecosystem. Is reinventing meat from the ground up really the first step you want to take towards changing that?
I would say that's the step that we at Orbelian Bio are best at. Honestly, I think in order to replace what we're currently doing in the livestock industry, in growing meat, in making more meat for more people on this planet is not sustainable and needs a lot of different approaches, right? We are one of them. There's also other approaches like regenerative farming, plant-based meats, and so on. And all of them are important. First and foremost, reducing food waste is something that we can immediately start doing. Cell-cultured meat is a little bit more of a long-term effort. We see the whole movement gaining momentum and the technology is being more and more developed, but we're still relatively in the early stages. And to make a meaningful impact, we are a couple of years away.
Yeah, and I know that this is part of a huge trend, which I am massively in support of. I really look forward to seeing how it turns out. And Aaron, I feel like the textiles and fashion industry is perhaps unappreciated at large, but by the average person as a source of emissions, but understood as a large source of material waste. Can you kind of tell me why switching to an algae-based textile is the next step?
Totally. So when you break down all of the factors that go into a garment and, say, like, where's the impact really happening? Anywhere between 50 to upwards of 70% of the overall emissions going into a garment or being produced by a garment come from the material itself. So, of course, there's things like transportation, it's like packaging, hang tags, stuff like that we can make a little bit of an adjustment in and get a little sort of marginal gain. But if we really want to make the impact that we want to make and prevent fashion from taking up 50% of the carbon budget by 2050. Materials are the only way to do it.
That's interesting. It's these sort of pathways towards carbon reduction that are just not expected for like the average person on the street. They think, we'll put filters on the tops of the smokestacks. I feel like when people think about reducing carbon emissions, they picture smokestacks, coal power, passenger vehicles. Do you think that perspective needs to change? And what should they be picturing instead? Maybe Aaron, you seem to be going along that line. Maybe you can sort of follow up on that.
Well, I'm not an expert on this specific thing, but my understanding is that if you are to take like coal or natural gas, any sort of fossil fuel, and convert it into energy versus plastic or materials, that conversion from fossil fuel to energy is much more efficient than that conversion to plastic. So it's like it points again towards this desperate need for new materials that it's like, if we're going to use fossil fuel, let's put it towards energy and not into materials.
And certainly it sounds like, Jennifer, you may have something to say about that because you're closely involved with that exact process.
Absolutely. If you put it in perspective, the world uses 100 million barrels, barrels, not gallons, of petroleum every single day. And it is to make power, to make fuels, and to make chemicals, the things that we use in our daily lives. I do think that most people do not realize when they think of fossils, they think of fuels, they don't realize that actually everything in our daily lives comes from fossil carbon. And so that's actually what LanzaTech is trying to do, is to show that there's a world where recycled carbon can be used to make every product in our daily lives. Today, we announced that we were working with Lululemon, who's already made garments from carbon that would have been an emission at a steel mill. Stop and think about it. Who ever thought that secondhand carbon from a steel mill could someday be your apparel? And that's the world we need to create, a world where fashion or anything, everything, plastics, furniture, seatbelts, all come from some type of waste.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like you're in direct competition with Aaron now, so we'll leave that for later. Because I want to ask Patricia, I feel like more than the other two in this panel, I feel like you've got a sort of PR battle ahead of you. The public perception is very important to this sort of whole alternative protein, cell cultured meat concept. How do you change people's minds, or maybe even the language that they use to make these alternative protein sources and alternative forms of meat not a fringe concept?
Yeah, Devin, that's a super important point for us. And I have to say, I studied chemical engineering. And from the beginning, I tried to help people understand that chemistry per se is not a bad thing, but we give chemicals a bad name. And similar is what is happening now, right? So I think it is very important to be very transparent and to help the consumer understand what we are doing. And that's why we try to show the consumer that what we're doing is similar to things that humanity has always done. We're just refining the process, right? For example, beer brewing and making wine, that all happens in big steel tanks and nobody's worried about that. Craft beer is even a thing. And what we will make with meat is very, very similar. So that are the different ways that we try to explain that to the consumer. And the second thing is, at Orbellion Bio, we, since the beginning, were adamant of making sure that what we create is really food with a story, directly from the farmer to the table. And I know I don't have the time to go into that now, but farmers are a very important part of where we all get our food from, and we want to preserve that in cellular agriculture.
Interesting. Maybe we should go with the term craft meat. Craft is already a brand. I guess we can't call it craft.
I love craft meat.
Craft meat sounds good.
I
just go with that. You can have that one. That one's a freebie.
Thank you. That's ours now.
You mentioned you just closed a seed round earlier this year. Congratulations. What is that at this stage of your company? What is that money going towards? Is it R&D? Is it staffing up? Is it sales? What's happening?
Yeah, so a large part of our R&D has actually already been done before. And so now for us, the important part is to go to scale up, which is the next big step to us to bring a product to the market. And so right now we are hiring, so to any bioprocess engineers and cell line engineers out there, please, just get in touch. We're looking for you. And so growing the team and really going towards that scale up of the bioprocess, and also refining our product and testing our product with consumers are the next most important steps for us. So at the end of of the money, we will be in a pilot plant facility.
Cool. And Aaron, you're sort of in an interesting point in your business as well. Can you tell us sort of what stage you're at as far as, are you sending reams of product to people? Are you still doing tests, sending little scraps here and there? You can tell how ignorant I am of this entire industry. But please just, sort of tell us where you are in this process, and a little more, can you maybe tell us a little bit about how the textiles that you're creating are created from the kelp? And then I want to follow up with Jennifer too.
Totally. And I'll just note that it's cones, not reams.
Oh, cones. Okay.
For the future. Yeah.
Good. Now I know.
Another totally sort of arbitrary measure. So yeah, we're sort of in the later stages of development and are heading towards pilot production early next year for that to come online. So we also closed a funding round earlier this spring, and that's really to get pilot production set up. We've been able to send out some samples here and there, but for us to have a really, productive collaboration with some of the fashion brands out there that have been so eager to work with us, it's like 330 brands now that have reached out over the last few years, and we're just now catching up. But yeah, it's like lab scale just doesn't allow us to really work effectively with brands, so we're making that change. The production process itself is actually really cool. We're sort of reinventing a process that has been done for hundreds of years, 100 plus, not hundreds of years,
hundreds,
about 100 years,
thousands.
Not that old. In the acrylic and the viscose rayon space. So it's this process called wet spinning, if you want to look it up. And we've been able to repurpose that equipment to make a totally clean fiber. So sort of those fibers have kind of a dirty, chemical heavy legacy. And we've been able to take out all the scary and the toxic stuff and replace it with water and minerals.
That's awesome. I'm hopefully that's the future of textiles and materials in general.
It should all look like something like that. I like to think about, at one stage or another, whether it's your feedstocks or, your output or your waste product, something's going to try and eat that. And we should allow that to happen.
Yeah. Totally.
And make it safe for all organisms on Earth. So,
speaking of organisms, when we return to Jennifer, and Jennifer, you're not the organism I'm talking about. I'm talking about the bacterium. But I'm curious, as Aaron just mentioned, they get to reuse some of the processes that other textile creators have used, which is a huge advantage. So in your case, can you tell me, are you sort of retrofitting existing factories? Are you working with these large established, chemical and manufacturing companies to build during the production? Can you give us a little sense of where you fit into these existing processes?
Sure. And so the way our technology works is we take it to where the pollutant is, right? So we'll put basically a fermenter that picks up the carbon monoxide, hydrogen, or carbon dioxide at a steel mill, at a refinery, at a chemical plant. And then it converts that to ethanol. So that is where we fit. Then if you think about it, what the ethanol becomes is a carbon and energy carrier for all these waste resources that are distributed. You're not going to move municipal solid waste thousands of miles. You're not going to move steel mill gases. So you convert them to ethanol, and then you move the ethanol. And then what do we do with the ethanol? ethylene is the largest chemical used today. It's the feedstock for everything we make, from apparel to bottles to chairs. And so what we're then doing is providing that ethanol to people that will put it into the ethylene supply chain. So that already exists. We don't need to reinvent that. So IGL, Indian glycols, FENC, Far Eastern, they took our ethanol and converted it to the PET that's being used for apparel today. So we're not trying to reinvent the supply chain. What we're trying to do is substitute a non-fossil feedstock. And if you'll allow me to just make one more comment,
Right.
you made a joke about, competing with Aaron. We're not competing. The problem we have is massive. It's just massive. And actually success will be determined by how many of us in this video and in this room, because someday we'll all be in a room, succeed. That is what success looks like, is
Absolutely.
everybody having a seat at the table.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Sorry, I didn't mean to sow discord in the ranks here.
There's plenty of that $1.2 trillion industry.
Seriously.
For all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, Patricia, you're entering an extremely large industry as well. But it must be just one of the most heavily regulated industries, which I feel like you have more barriers than anyone else in bringing your product to market, as like with the FDA, I assume. Can you tell us a little about how you are approaching the legal and regulatory landscape? And then if Aaron and Jennifer, you probably have your own challenges, we can come to that after.
Yeah, you're totally right there. Regulatory is a little bit unclear at the moment. Let's put it that way. And, first of all, let's look at why we have regulatory in place. It's to protect the consumer, right? So the idea is there for us to say, hey, this is a new product and we prove it is safe, and then we will get regulatory approval. And that's it, really. A little bit more complicated. But these regulations are in place for a reason, and I'm very happy they are there as a food consumer myself. And it is just a matter of time. We saw regulatory approval in Singapore last year of the first cell-cultured product. And I am sure that in the next coming months, there will be significant movement in other countries around the world. And that will be something that's very exciting because it opens up the market. And I had to laugh a little bit because we also say, it's a 1.2 trillion market of meat. And I say the same thing. And I love how beautifully, Jennifer, you phrased that we need other competitors in this space to show that this market can be saturated and to show that we're actually a big industry, which we're not yet, but we're growing, Devin, we're getting there. Yeah. So I'm happy to see more and more scientists and other people that have something to say in this business found companies and grow their companies in this space. It's super important.
That you reminded me of something with having more people at the table. Aaron, I feel like there's sort of a burgeoning kelp ecosystem right now, not biologically speaking, but that it's being shown to be a very useful crop in a lot of ways. There's sort of a kelp renaissance. What's the story with that? Has that just recently been discovered, or are people just now realizing, like, wait a second, this kind of aquaculture thing is more sustainable, and it actually is a very useful crop? Can you tell us a little about that ecosystem you're taking part in?
Totally. The idea that, like kelp could save the world is not necessarily a new idea. It's just
I personally thought it
into the mainstream. And, it's like we've been able to, macroalgae kelp. This is, arguably the fastest growing, fastest carbon absorbing organism on Earth. So when you think about, what's a bio-based solution to, harvesting carbon and turning it into useful products like clothing, like kelp is the way to go, but just because it grows so fast.
Yeah.
But, there's sort of myriad benefits from, improving water quality, improving fish habitat. We all know overfishing is a huge issue. And, but then it's also, absorbing CO2, and you can imagine at scale that could sort of be a bulwark for global warming to sort of keep it at bay.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the shift in general to aquaculture over terrestrial crops and stuff in general, I think there's a lot going on there, which I intend to keep a very close eye on. It's very fascinating.
Absolutely. We've got a lot of ocean versus land in the world.
No
And
kidding.
if we
So I've
could
heard.
even just take advantage of a piece of that, I think the ARPA-E just recently released something that said, there's the potential for like 500 billion kilos of seaweed to be grown just in the United States along the coast. And so just the potential worldwide is incredible.
Jennifer, if we could come back to the idea of working with older companies, like big established industrial companies, I feel like maybe they are generally conservative in terms of their margins and things like that. Even though there's a huge opportunity here, I feel like they're probably resistant to the idea when you come to them and say, hey, we're going to attach this bioreactor to your factory. They're like, wow, that sounds complicated. We already make money. Thank you. How did you get these industries on board with something that they must see as a complexifier rather than just an opportunity?
Wow, that's a great way of saying it, actually. I really like that. I'm going to steal that line.
Yes, please do.
It definitely adds complexity. There's no question. And it definitely is something they never believed or imagined or made sense, right? You tell a steel mill, you're going to bring a bacteria. It's like, whoa. But in fairness, as with everything else that's new, what you find is there are the progressives and there are the laggards, if you will. And the progressives will get really excited about the idea. So you walk in and you say, I can take your gas that is going to become pollution and convert it to ethanol and convert that to jet fuel or apparel or detergent. And the ones that are going to get it immediately light up. And the ones that are not, they won't. And they won't until everybody else has done it. And so my view is you get a lot of no's, but you get a couple of yeses. And the yeses are high quality partners in China, like Shogang, who wanted to grow their business but not create more pollution. ArcelorMittal, Indian Oil. These are all companies that are committed to making a change as they grow. So you work with them first.
Smart, yeah. You're right. I guess once they realize that it's a race, they've already lost the race. Patricia, I guess I have a similar question for you. Obviously, the world's sort of meat concerns and growing concerns, and it's such a large, sprawling ecosystem. I imagine some of them must be resistant to this idea, and some of them must see that it's obviously part of the future. How do you approach them, or do they approach you? And how do you reach a sort of like an equilibrium with this, this huge and complicated industry?
Yes, you're right. We see the same thing. But, just today, there was an announcement that another big player, Nestle, is starting to bet on cell cultured meat. So I think they have been waiting a little bit on the sidelines. There were some early adopters, right? Like Cargill, for example. But some of them are waiting on the sidelines to see how it evolves, but they're eager to get in now, and we can sense that. So we are totally interested in talking to bigger industry partners, because the one thing that as a startup we don't have right now is the distribution network for the products that we're crafting, right? So we're very interested in partnering with them and using their experience, as likewise a lot of them are interested in building their future business, and also, of course, feeding off the innovation that happens in startups such as Arbillion Bio.
And you actually mentioned the practical part of scaling up as well. I'm really curious about it. I know that a lot of our readers will be curious about, like, what does a cell cultured meat production facility look like as you imagined it in the future? I'm picturing these huge, giant warehouses, vats, and things. It's all very sort of steampunk. But I imagine there's probably a much more realistic, interesting, clean, cool environment. Like, how does that look? How should we be picturing this?
No, I think, Devin, with the steampunk thing, you're in the right direction. It looks a little bit like that. So again, if you've ever been to a brewery like that, just a lot bigger, and of course, we're talking about food grade facilities there where you can not only grow the cells, but then also make the product, right? So we're looking at smaller and bigger steel tanks for the production of the meat. And then, of course, a regular food production side of the plant where you make the actual products. And so that will depend on the different technologies of the companies. And as of now, there's just no such facility. No production is yet at scale. There are a couple of pilot plants out there. So it's going to be interesting how that will develop. And I'm sure that in the nearest future, we will see and hear more about that. But again, it's not like reinventing the wheel. All of these technologies are here and have been successfully used and developed over the last decades, mainly in biopharma and biotech industries.
Gotcha. Okay, it's interesting to imagine how the future looks, but it never looks quite like what we expect. So, and on that note, I'd like you all to break out your crystal balls, because I wanted to ask you to look down the road a little bit and talk about sort of the future of the industries that you're involved in. Maybe Jennifer, since you've been working closely with these big companies in this space, like Unilever, anyway, you know who I'm talking about. Maybe you've gained some insights into the plans in that area with these enormous companies, these enormous distribution networks. What does the next 5 to 10 years look like in terms of finding new sources for these materials, new feedstock, stuff like that? Where do you envision us in a few years?
Well, I would say that the brands we're working with, you mentioned Unilever as an example, are really committed to changing their supply chains and creating a different future where carbon that they use does not come from fossils, where food and protein does not come from animals. These are things that they're very, very focused on, and they are pushing it and pushing it hard, eager to see innovation and eager to help with the innovation, right? The first pilot apparel or the first commercial apparel made from steel mill, people are going to say, wait, that's nuts. Do I really want that? And so they're taking risks along with us, right? And so I see the big industrials taking risks, trying to create a different future. And frankly, my view is very simple. I think we're going to decarbonize the grid. And as soon as we decarbonize the grid, we're going to use CO2 and we're going to use synthetic biology and we're going to make every product we use in our daily lives from waste. I don't think that's a dream. I think that's real. And 10 years from now, we'll come back and talk about it again and you'll see. Excellent.
Wow, that's a great prediction. I hope that it's that way. Aaron, I guess I already asked about the sort of switch to aquaculture, but in the fashion world and in textiles and things like that, do you see 5-10 years from now a major switch to sustainable materials?
Absolutely. And I think, there's so many, up and coming companies, at this, similar stage as AlgaeNet that are like on that cusp of, dropping into, different lines, for major brands around the world. And I don't think it'll take 10 years. I think in 5 years, we're going to see really significant change already. And, the key thing is, infrastructure is in place and it's hard to change infrastructure, especially change it quickly. So those companies that can take advantage of that infrastructure that's already in place are going to be really the first ones to get out there in the market.
Yeah. And we only have just a minute left, but I wanted to ask Patricia, of course, your prediction as well. I feel like the alternative protein revolution is only just now getting started, but in 5 years, it's going to be in full swing. What do you envision in the next 5 to 10 years, how the landscape will look?
I really envision a wide variety of super exciting and tasty and environmentally beneficial products coming out that consumers will enjoy. We will change the way we eat largely. In 10 years from now, we will look back and say, wow, we only had this available. I see it similar to when we started making completely new materials from fossil fuels back in the beginning of the 20th centuries. Look, plastic is everywhere now. In a couple of years from now, alternative proteins, cell cultured meat will be everywhere.
I believe you, and I'll be eating them. I guess that pretty much wraps up our time. I want to thank you all for joining me today, Jennifer, Aaron, and Patricia. This has been a very interesting talk. I learned a lot, including how to pronounce some of the things people you're partnering with and your companies. I love the work that you're doing, and I'm sure that our readers will be very excited to hear about the next steps. So looking forward to hearing more from you. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Devin.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.